Our environment is bombarding us with different toxins, including electropollution, and these toxins are aging us faster than we should. How can we start reversing that trend? You're watching the 2024 EMF Hazards Summit. My name is Nick, the EMF guy Pinot, and this is the 2024 EMF Hazards Summit. In this presentation, David Schmidt will share some key discoveries he made on how we can use the human body's natural light emissions to slow down the aging process. Considering that some EMF researchers like Dr. Magda Havas has called the electrosensitivity a kind of rapid aging syndrome, this information we're going to share today is critical for everyone to understand. David Schmidt is the inventor of LifeWave technology and founder and CEO of LifeWave. As a result of his countless inventions, David was presented with an honorary doctorate by Dr. Alexander Marinaccio of the International Hall of Fame of Inventors. He is the holder of 24 issued patents, with many more being written. Let's dive in. I'm here with David Schmidt. David, thanks so much for being part of EMF Hazards.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure and really looking forward to our time together.
Me too. I came across your work because two or I think three separate people emailed me the same week telling me about the patches, about David Schmidt. You have to check out this stuff. And I said, okay, well, three different people from different walks of life, not related to one another. I said, okay, there's probably something to it. It's very rare that this occurs. And I started looking into it. I saw the studies, I saw the science, and I started listening to a few interviews you gave. And I was very fascinated by the topic. So let the audience know before we start, what is your background, professionally speaking, and then we'll get into how did you discover these things you discovered around how the body emits EMFs or emits light.
Okay, so professionally, I have my formal education in computer science, management, and biology. And in the 90s, I had a development company where the small group, we were developing survival equipment for the U.S. Navy through government contractors like General Dynamics and Newport News Shipbuilding. And it was out of that experience, I was looking to develop a new way to improve survivability of Navy SEALs on a mini-sub. And I thought, well, these guys have to go on a long mission. They're currently using caffeine and amphetamines to stay awake for a long period of time. Why don't we take a new approach? So I worked for several years on that, and the LifeWave patches came out of that effort. So the basic idea was that we could stimulate the skin with very low levels of light and turn on a biochemical process, in this case, beta oxidation, which is in the mitochondria, the electron transport chain, where we're converting fats over into energy. So that was the very, very beginning. And since that time, LifeWave has grown over the past 20 years to being a global company. We are extremely successful financially, and we've worked to expand our portfolio of patents and products. And our primary interest today is at looking at how we can improve lifespan and health span and duplicate what some organisms do on this planet, which is they never age and they don't die. So we're looking at how to apply that to human beings.
Tremendous. So how does it work? I read some things about the patches, let's say being a type of light-based acupuncture. I don't know if that's accurate. Let us know a little bit about the science behind them, because I think this is fascinating new science to me, at least.
Yeah, I think what I'd say is that this is definitely a blend of both Eastern and Western medicine. So anytime we're going to stimulate the surface of the skin, we're going to be stimulating both nerve clusters as well as acupuncture points. And now, whether or not people have training in it or they're educated in it, the science of acupuncture and acupressure is very well documented in terms of these microfilaments of collagen fibers that exist throughout the body. And these fibers have electrolytes, so they conduct infrared energy, and they act essentially as a high-speed fiber optic cable in the body. So, we can look at that from a Western perspective, or from an Eastern perspective, we can say these are meridians or channels that carry energy. But regardless, our product, what it's designed to do is stimulate the skin with very low levels of light for improving the flow of energy in the body, for activating these meridians, and for improving energy production in the cell. So that I would say is probably the most critical part of the tech. We have a new way of turning on energy production in the mitochondria, and this has a whole host of benefits.
Because a lot of people, I don't know what's the prevalence of mitochondrial dysfunction, officially speaking. I would tend to say 100%. A lot of different factors affect our mitochondria and mitochondrial energy production. A lot of people on this summit fall on the electrosensitive spectrum and have low energy all the time, fatigue, chronic insomnia. It's a long-term thing. So exactly where does the copper producing peptide comes in? For specific products, you have the patches that are X39. Where does that come in, and what is this copper producing peptide? Because I think this is an interesting part of the story here.
It's extremely interesting, and there's a lot there, to unpack. So I think the first thing is that with regards to mitochondrial dysfunction, it is eventually going to affect everyone. It is, we could say, on the one hand, a normal part of the aging process, but there's really nothing normal about aging. We should really be looking at aging as a disease. And we can characterize it that way because as people age, they take on an abnormal amount of oxidative stress, inflammatory stress. There's a shift in energy metabolism where we have difficulty metabolizing fats, so we shift more to processing carbohydrates. This leads us more prone to type 1 and type 2 diabetes, accumulation of body fat, and so forth. So mitochondrial dysfunction is an extraordinarily serious problem. And in the longevity community, this is one of the principal things that people look at is what are some of the methods that we can utilize to restore the mitochondria to normal, healthy function. Because as a result, we see that gene expression changes, right? So these are epigenetic factors that are introduced into the cell for getting the mitochondria to function like a normal, healthy mitochondria. And then as a result, the cell starts to behave like a young, healthy cell. So I would say this would really be first and foremost. And if someone wanted a simple approach to anti-aging and longevity, that would be the type of thing that you'd focus on, is looking at nutrients like acetyl L-carnitine, alpha-lipoic acid, technology like LifeWave. Some of the new things are NMN and NR. But all these factors that can turn on mitochondrial function. Heavy resistance training, for example, can increase the number of mitochondria in the muscle tissue, and also can reset about 78 genes associated with youth and longevity. So that would be the core start. After that, what's interesting is that we can look at the phenomena of parabiosis. And so parabiosis goes back maybe more than 150 years. And what's interesting is that, sometimes in science, people will make observations, and then because those observations don't fit with someone's teachings or their mindset, they'll discount the results from a scientific study.
Yeah.
And parabiosis has very much been the victim of this in the sense that, we're taught in school that we're born, we age, and we die. And I think any reasonable person would say, well, there's certainly a lot of evidence that that's the case. But if we change our thinking about this, we can say, well, wait a minute now. We can observe living organisms like tardigrades, like planaria, hydractinia. We can look at the regenerative capacity of tadpoles and frogs, certain frogs. And what we study are certain species of ants called temnothorax, as well as studying lobsters. And what we find is that not all species age the same way. In fact, there are species that absolutely defy the aging process. So in looking at parabiosis, because this relates to mammals now, we take the blood from an old rat and we connect the blood supply from the old rat to a young rat and pump the young blood into the old rat, right? This is how it was done many, many years ago. What happens is that old rat starts to become physically younger. The cells start to behave like younger, healthier cells. And there's been several peptides that have been discovered that are responsible for this phenomena. One of them is called GHK-CU, and otherwise known as copper peptide. And this was discovered by Dr. Lauren Picard in the late 1960s. So long story short, so I'm not doing all the talking, is that this one single, very simple peptide, it's made of 3 amino acids, and it has an extremely high affinity for binding with copper. This one simple peptide has the ability to reset thousands of genes in the human body. And as a result, it's able to take those genes, about 1/3 of the human genome, and reset them to a more youthful state. So we have evidence now that it has been identified that there is a simple peptide in the human body that can help us to recapture part of our youth and get a number of extraordinary benefits in the process.
Yeah, this is fascinating. And I did my research on, there's a website, peptidesciences.com, just looking at different peptides, what they do. It says that the GHK-CU, the copper peptide, was shown an efficacy for hair growth comparable to one of the most commonly used medication in the restoration for hair growth, just to name this one specific branch of medicine. So it's interesting that it's used for hair growth, and which is part of aging. A lot of people have problems losing their hair. But what else is it good for? You talked about being younger. Is it that it helps us mitigate oxidative stress, such as the sheer amount of different toxins we're exposed to? Is there an aspect of it makes our biology more resilient to the stress of the environment?
Yeah. So what we would look at in terms of the studies that have been done on GHK-CU, we would look at differentiating between topical application, injections of copper peptide, and then using light therapy to elevate copper peptide, because the effects are significantly different. With regards to hair growth, for people that are interested, since I've spoken with some doctors about this, is actually what Lauren Picard found is that GHK does have an affinity for restoring hair. However, AHK had the same level of efficacy as minoxidil, but the mechanism of action is different. So I would say that people that are interested in this should look at topical application of AHK, and they should also consider microneedling to open up the pores, as well as you're creating inflammatory stress in the skin to attract stem cells to the site to create to create formation of new hair follicles with those stem cells. But if we look at the longevity benefits of GHK, then we would start to analyze and have a model for aging. And there's certainly a number of them. So some of the models of longevity and aging have to do with the telomeres. So in other words, the cells can divide a certain number of time. They hit what's called the Hayflick limit, which is they can replicate maybe 50 times. And then after that, you hit the top end of human lifespan. So if we can lengthen the telomeres, then we can keep the cells dividing and we can extend lifespan and health span. So that's one model for aging, which is quite accurate, but not all inclusive. So another model to consider is the one of oxidative and inflammatory stress, which again is relevant and also offers degree of predictability of health span and lifespan. But again, it's not inclusive of some other factors. So in other words, what we would say is as the cells start to age, they begin to shrink. This is from a decline in the production of collagen in the fibroblasts. So the collagen is going to be responsible for holding water inside the cell. And as the collagen matrix, which we call the cytoskeleton, begins to collapse, then the electrical charge around the cell begins to decline. And this is a problem because when the cells divide, there's some work done by a biophysicist, Giannini Dotto, back in the 70s. And effectively what he found was that the cell membrane, the electrical charge around the cell membrane, when the cell would collapse, it would produce an EMF. And that EMF, this is now a beneficial, a naturally occurring human EMF, right? When that EMF would inductively couple to the DNA, and that energy was required for cell replication. And as the fibroblasts began to decline in their production of collagen, the cell begins to collapse. That voltage now and the total amount of the EMF declines, and the genetic expression changes, and we get an aging cell. So that's an interesting mechanism in and of itself. But the other side to that is the mitochondria begins to decline. And now we get a decrease in the production of intracellular antioxidants. Cell metabolism now produces oxidative and inflammatory stress that we can't get under control. And eventually by the around of age 50, we develop something that is now referred to as inflammaging, meaning that there is a chronic state of oxidative and inflammatory stress. So it's well known now that this will damage the DNA, create strand breaks in the DNA, and eventually lead to decline in the immune function, and people develop, arthritis as a result. So, one of the real keys to living longer and having a healthier life is to manage the oxidative and inflammatory stress. And there's several ways of doing that, one of which is to keep antioxidants like glutathione, SOD, and catalase elevated. And there's several very easy ways of doing that.
That's tremendous. And as far as the link with going back to electropollution, there are studies, countless studies on just the presence of a cell phone tower in the vicinity. We're talking about 1 kilometer or even 1 mile in certain studies, which is, let's face it, most people are in a situation in cities where they are exposed to multiple towers now. And just that was alone had a strong correlation with a reduction in glutathione levels, SOD catalase. So it looks like our environment is increasingly depleting us, kind of aging us more rapidly than we should. Even it led Dr. Magda Havas from Canada, who's a prominent EMF researcher. She coined the term rapid aging syndrome, which she says, electrosensitivity should really be called rapid aging syndrome because a lot of people feel older than they should prematurely, right? So this is another aspect.
I would agree with that. Absolutely. I'd agree with that. I think the good news here, right? So we want to have a positive focus and give people solutions to problems. It's extraordinarily important to build awareness about problems and define them. But then equally, we do want to give people solutions to those problems. And my perspective on this, after studying organisms that don't age and looking at what I would say is the fingerprint of God, meaning that you see these mathematical codes that show up in living systems that don't age. And these codes also appear in the Bible. That we have been given as human beings the ability to upgrade and the ability to adapt to these problems. So, for example, naturally occurring copper. So we can get copper in very high amounts in the liver. So, a lot of people don't like to eat liver.
That's true.
If you're in a country like Romania, it's certainly abundant. If you like chocolate, chocolate is rich in liver. Wheatgrass is rich in liver. Or you can simply take copper, or you can take a copper supplement. And the benefits to this is that what the studies show is that oral supplementation with copper accumulates in the skin and will shield and protect the body from EMFs. So the degree to which that happens is all relative to overall age and health, as well as the amount of the EMF exposure. So taking a daily supplement of copper is a very inexpensive strategy for dealing with these EMFs in the environment. And then a second one is what we see in studies where people have been exposed to EMF is that they have depleted levels of glutathione. So the advantage of glutathione is that it's a tripeptide. It can share its electrons with other antioxidants like vitamin C and recycle them. But simply taking a supplement of NAC twice a day, and of course we have a product for that too, but I'd say given what happened with COVID and some of the new data now on reducing the symptoms and reversing the symptoms of the spike protein, taking NAC will address not only the issue of EMFs, but the residual damage of the spike protein, whether or not someone had COVID or whether or not they got vaccinated, which we know today is an enormous problem.
Yeah, I heard a lot of it about NEC. So when it comes to NEC, is it true that certain people have a hard time processing NEC and should take more of a reduced form of glutathione? I cannot recall the science around this, but is it?
You're correct.
Yeah.
It's not the issue that people have a difficulty metabolizing NAC. It's whether or not they lack the enzyme that's necessary to convert NAC over to glutathione. So manufacture of glutathione from 3 amino acids is critical on one step. And if people are lacking that enzyme, they can't form what's called gamma-glutamyl-cysteine. And gamma-glutamyl-cysteine or glycine is directly converted to glutathione. So there's actually one company that does manufacture glycine. And so for those individuals that have chronically low glutathione and they can't make it from NAC, then the good news is that there is at least a product on the market for elevating glutathione by supplementing with glycine.
Okay, I was not aware of this research at all, so that's thank you for that. As far as electrosensitivity, I recall in our previous conversation you had maybe some experience with individuals that are hypersensitive. Is there a way that the LifeWave products or which LifeWave products might help individuals listening to this that are suffering from this hypersensitivity, whether it's to EMFs or maybe to chemicals as well, which is very common as well?
Yeah, what I would say is that we have preliminary study data which indicates that elevating copper peptide in the body is a effective way for reducing the impact of EMFs on the body. What I had done was work with a hypothesis that if we could elevate copper peptide, both AHK and GHK, that this would form a natural Faraday cage. And that is definitely contingent upon there being enough copper in the body. But what we know factually is that both GHK and AHK will be stored in the skin. And there is preceding data from other studies that show that, for example, when women go through chemotherapy and they want to protect themselves from radiation burns, getting injections of copper peptide will, in fact, protect them from the radiation. So there's good data to show that this is the case. There's also data to show that keeping copper peptide levels elevated protects the cells from damage from UV light. There's some other studies that show that if the body was damaged by EMFs or UV light and it damages the DNA, that if the glutathione levels are kept high enough, that the glutathione will repair the DNA before cell replication. And this, of course, prevents mutations and prevents people from getting things like cancer. So this is why it's important to be thinking about getting enough copper in the diet, getting enough NAC, keeping your glutathione levels elevated.
This is a fascinating angle. I think it's important to note that in at least a few researchers, those that are in biophysics, I think generally agree that the damage from ionizing radiation, whether you mentioned part of UV is ionizing or X-rays or radiation therapy also for treatment of cancer would be, is pretty much acts with the same mechanisms as non-ionizing radiation, such as cell phone radiation, although, of course, it's a much, let's say, longer duration that the cell phone radiation would take longer to do damage, but essentially through the creation of reactive oxygen species or nitrogen species, some researchers tend to think that this is essentially the same mechanism, although at a slower burn, so to speak. So I think, would you agree that the research on ionizing radiation and radiation protection could, in some sense, be extrapolated to non-ionizing radiation, at least as a working hypothesis?
Well, actually, I think this would be beyond a hypothesis at this point. So another way to look at this, what you're articulating, is that on one side of the scientific community, we have people saying, well, these EMFs that are produced by cell phone towers, that energy is so low and so weak that it couldn't have an effect on a living system.
Yeah.
And that logic is inherently flawed, because when we look at the strength of the naturally occurring electromagnetic fields in the cell, they're incredibly weak. And so what we know is that, in fact, it only requires 1 or 2 packets of photons to initiate a change in gene expression to activate a receptor. So we're talking about incredibly weak electromagnetic fields. So in fact, if we were to think of human cells as a transformer, and we were to apply the laws surrounding electrical transformers, which are, of course, very well known, what we would find is that in order to inductively couple one field to another, so a primary to a secondary, we have to match those fields. So, in fact, a weaker electromagnetic field from an EMF actually couples better to a human cell than a stronger field. What happens in a stronger field is that you don't get you don't get induction in the sense of changing gene expression. What you get is tissue heating, and that tissue heating creates oxidative and inflammatory stress. So the bottom line here is you can have different wavelengths of energy or different frequencies of energy and different intensities, and they can both have detrimental effects on the cell, but the mechanism of action is different. One is creating tissue heating, and the other is creating alterations in gene expression or interference of the natural electromagnetic field of the cell, because the energy does in fact couple well because it's weaker.
Mm-hmm. And it is to be noted that I think our cells are kind of respond to the entire electromagnetic spectrum. I think it was just a very, very bad assumption that parts of the spectrum can be used for telecommunications because our cells ignore it. They don't. They even respond to solar flares and the Earth's natural magnetic field that is in very low hertz, 7.83, and the other sub frequencies of the Schumann resonance up to anything, gamma rays and X-rays. We're reacting to all of it, right?
Yeah, that actually is incredibly extraordinary about the design of the human body, is that we can apply frequencies of energy in the audio range and we can get a therapeutic response. So we've used frequencies in the audio range to regrow peripheral nerves. On the other hand, on the way other side of the spectrum, you have light therapy. And so you have a band between 400 and 700 nanometers, and that has a therapeutic effect. Infrared is a separate effect. And of course, UV can have a very damaging effect. Microwaves, it was found by the Russians that between, let's say, it was around 50 to 70 gigahertz is going to be the frequencies at which DNA resonates. So there was a device that was developed, in fact, to resonate DNA at those frequencies. And this is what we see with 5G now, is that we're getting into the very high gigahertz, and these frequencies are interfering with the very way that DNA is designed to work.
Yeah, and I think it's also fascinating that a lot of research in Eastern Europe, and I think especially Russia, has been using millimeter waves in these higher gigahertz you talked about, but for therapeutics. The problem I have with this idea, not with therapeutics, but with our use of telecommunications in those bands, is our use is not controlled, it's not optimized, it's not a certain specific waveform, it's not pulsed at a specific rate that has been found to be beneficial, and it's not used for just 15 minutes of treatment, right? It's used randomly, chaotically.
Yeah. Interestingly, so Norm Shealy, who's a very well-known medical doctor and researcher, we've done studies with Dr. Shealy since maybe 2009, 2010 or so. And he has a technology for regrowing and lengthening the telomeres. And what's interesting about it is that it is based on the idea that we're going to put microwaves through a sapphire crystal. And this then produces a 50 to 70 gigahertz frequency, which is able to inductively charge DNA and cause growth of the telomeres. It's very mild. It's about 30 minutes of treatment per day with this device. And after about a year, you get about a 1% growth of the telomeres. That's compared to a 0.5% to 1% degradation of the telomeres over time. So, as it turns out, we can use microwaves in a very therapeutic way, but not the way they're being used with 5G.
I agree 100%. There's also topical applications I've learned about more recently. I was even in Thailand and had a ankle injury before a very hard race. And I went to a practitioner there, and they use microwave therapy at a fairly high power where you can feel your entire tissue heating up. And it is quite researched, that area of beneficial treatment for muscle or joint injuries. So I was surprised because I had never heard about it. So I don't think we need to necessarily be fearful of all this technology or even using man-made frequencies, but it needs to be studied in a specific way. The way we use it for telecommunication is optimized for speed and bandwidth. And if we optimize it for health, who knows, maybe we can thrive in this environment. But David, I don't want to take too much of your time, and I want to focus on one aspect is the research behind the LifeWave patches. You mentioned a few things, but I was impressed with the sheer amount of studies that the company has been involved with. I know that one of them is at or maybe multiple at SciTech Labs, Dr. Gaetan Chevalier and Bob Hertz, and a few people that I collaborate with these days. So I was pleasantly surprised to see their names pop up. I know that one of them showed what they said, a dramatic effect on some participants who saw their brain calm down after 3 weeks of wearing the patches. Are there specific research projects that you want to mention that you're really proud of the results? Because there are so many to mention. We could probably talk for hours, but a few of them that stand out that you want to share with us.
There's certainly many of the studies over the years I would say have been really enjoyable to do, and the two researchers that you mentioned, it's been an absolute privilege to work with them on studies over the years. The one that you were referring to was, I think what I would say is it's absolutely a concern for everyone of what's going to happen with cognition as we age. What happens after somebody gets over the age of 50 or 60, we would expect age-related cognitive decline. I just turned 60 this year, so these are definitely things as, an inventor that I think about. I want to maintain healthy cognition and memory. So this is something that we study. And there's a number of very effective ways, and both therapeutically and with nutritional supplements and with LifeWave patches, that people can keep their cognitive abilities and also, potentially delay the onset of some types of disease. I would only make those claims about nutritional products. With our products, what we're looking to do is elevate carnosine, GHK, AHK, and study their effects on cognition. So the study with Dr. Chevalier, that was a investigational study, and it was open label. And what we found was that in as little as 3 weeks of using the X39 patch, that in 12 out of 12 participants, there was a dramatic improvement in cognition. We also saw similar effects. We did a study with Dr. Tom Budzinski, very well-known researcher, and we found after 30 days of using our carnosine patch that we reversed age-related cognitive decline. So the normal decline in cognitive abilities as we age. So to me, that's really, really exciting. We did a study in France with Dr. Pierre Volkmann. And Dr. Volkmann is regarded as, an expert in pain management. And he was at the time over in General de Santé in Lyon. And he's since moved over to a hospital in Paris. And, the French can be skeptical. And so I went in and did a presentation for a panel of medical doctors, and they said, well, this light therapy sounds interesting, but prove it. Let's see it work. Mm-hmm. So in a period of an hour, I applied our patches to 32 people, and 32 out of 32 people had 50 to 100% relief of pain in 2 to 3 minutes. That we then followed that up with a study with 75 people, and 96% of the participants got pain relief in that study to statistical significance. So that was a study that we did with someone that's a world authority in pain management in a hospital, and we produced a phenomenal outcome. And then I think I'd say the multiple studies that we've done over the years where we apply our patches, you do blood tests, you do urine tests, and you see these very dramatic and statistically significant improvements in blood chemistry. So you see increases in peptides, reduction in inflammatory stress, and you see the metabolism getting turned on. So things like improvements in protein synthesis. The first study that we did on X39, where we showed it was capable of increasing copper peptide, that was especially rewarding.
For sure, because of course everyone is asking for proof that things you claim are being improved in the body are, and the study in the hospital setting is especially fantastic to me, because it's especially in the group of people that are very skeptical. This is exactly the environment that you want to put your product through to really prove its efficacy. As far as I'm concerned, I can share that I've been I wore the patches for 6 months this year at the beginning of the year, and really felt, I'd say it was both powerful and subtle at the same time. As I'm a healthy 35-year-old at this point, so I'm not expecting massive results. However, I did realize that something is slightly different. I don't get as fatigued. My energy levels are slightly better. I can tell you my hormones, my feeling of, not to want to get too personal, my personal libido also, I've seen improvements. It's all markers for me that my overall performance was increased. So as far as human optimization goes, even if you're not initially thinking about aging, you're still young, I did see benefits personally. So I wanted to share that with the audience. David, thank you so much for your time. And where can we find more information about LifeWave and any other projects you want to mention to the listeners?
Yeah, they can simply go to lifewave.com. They can visit our website. They can go to any one of our social media channels, and they can learn more about what it is that we're doing. I think the one last thing that I would say about LifeWave is that we're very concerned about providing humanitarian aid. So as we've been doing this now for 20 years, we've been incredibly successful. So part of what I feel is our responsibility is giving back to those in need. So globally, we've made donations to refugees out of the Ukraine when the war first started. We made those donations through organizations like the Red Cross. There were victims of floods in Germany and Japan. We made donations there. And of course, more recently, hurricane victims here in the state of Florida and also over in Hawaii. We've been facilitating donations and humanitarian aid. So I think it's really important when companies become successful that they have a program of giving back and helping those in need.
Thank you so much. This means a lot. I'm still a small company myself through this dedication. I was successfully able to give 30,000 to EMF related causes and nonprofits in the last 2 years with EMF Hazards. And I'm not sharing these numbers with the audience to say, oh, this is a big amount or a small amount. It's just to say that giving to those in need is important. Whether Absolutely. It's 1 cent or $1 billion,
Oh, 30,000 is a huge amount of money. We've donated money to Convoy of Hope, and for $1, you could feed a young child and give them some basic nutrition. So that absolutely makes a difference in someone's life.
Well, thank you so much. It's good to see other entrepreneurs and inventors such as yourself, who also clearly has a hard-based focus, I'll call it. Conscious capitalism is really where it's at. And I think having more of these companies that really deeply care about people, give back, and also contribute to the science, this is really what defines, I think, companies that will change the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Nicholas. I really appreciate your time.
I hope this presentation was valuable to you. The takeaways for me are that first, premature aging shares a lot of things in common with electrosensitivity, like the presence of chronic out of control inflammation. There are many ways to control this inflammation, including a reduction in EMF exposure or exposure to other toxins. But also on the flip side, there are strategies like certain nutrients that David talked about, or tools like the LifeWave patches that can help you increase your body's innate resilience to these stressors that we're all the time exposed to. If you love this presentation and want to own all of the recordings for the entire event, the 2024 EMF Hazards Summit, along with transcripts, MP3s, and our must-have bonus package from speakers and sponsors, just click the button on this page. Remember that this offer is only available for a very limited time, after which it won't be possible to purchase the EMF pack anymore. So make sure to get it before it's too late. I'll see you in the next presentation. Thanks for watching.